Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the August 17th regular meeting of Council. The City of Parksville recognizes the people of the Coast Salish Nations and their territory upon which we gather with gratitude. The first item I have this evening are the minutes of the Council meeting held August the 5th. Do I have a mover and a seconder? Moved by Councillor Oates, seconded by Councillor Powell. Are there any errors or omissions? All those in favor? Thank you. That is carried. The second item is the adoption of the minutes of the special council meeting held August the 10th. Do I have a mover and a seconder for that meeting? Councillor Patterson, Councillor Greer, seconded by Councillor Greer. Are there any errors or omissions? Being none, all those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. That is carried. The next item is the approval of the agenda, that the August 17th, 2015 council meeting agenda be approved. I need a mover and a seconder. Moved by Councillor Salter, seconded by Councillor Powell. Any errors or omissions? Seeing none, all those in favor? Thank you. We have one delegation this evening, and it's the Parksville and District Association for Community Living. We have with us this evening Barb Reed, Violet Hayes, and Sarah Poole. So would you please come to the bench, turn the microphone on, and tell us all about what you're doing and how things are going.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Barb Reed. I'm the Executive Director of the Parksville and District Association for Community Living. And we have just purchased the building at 249 Hirst, which is the old health unit building. And what we're trying to do is do a partnership with the Crisis Care Society. And to do that, we need a rezoning. So I'm going to introduce Sarah and Violet, who are going to do a presentation about what the work it is that we want to do in that building, and then we'll go from there. So Sarah, you're up next.
Thanks very much, and welcome, Sarah.
Thanks. When homelessness was first brought to the attention of the City of Parksville Council and Mayor, they began to form the Oceanside Task Force on Homelessness at that point. And that was the beginning of their commitment to addressing the issues of homelessness in the Oceanside area, and specifically in Parksville. In the last year, the task force has formed a Housing First team consisting of outreach workers and healthcare providers from local agencies. We've housed to date 9 individuals. We've provided 7-day-a-week support to both clients and landlords. We've had no evictions. We've helped men, women, youth, a family. We've helped people with physical health and mental health challenges, addictions, you name it. This process has worked for all of them. Having a place to connect with clients, for them to come during the day, is a critical piece of being able to build these relationships to get them to a point where we can house them. As well as, we don't work with clients that are stably housed and things are going well. We work with them when they're in crisis. Usually they've already lost their housing or are currently homeless. And to build a relationship when you have no place to be able to meet with them, no place to be able to help them have some kind of safe housing until you can provide something more permanent in a place where we have the lowest vacancy rate in British Columbia, in Parksville. Without having access to housing, we need a place for a temporary basis to be able to build those relationships and connections so that we can lead them on to a better life for the future.
Violet's turn.
And I'm Violet with Island Crisis Care Society. And I joined the task force here about 2 years ago. And I've been really excited to see how it's working so well in this community. We applied for funding through the Homelessness Partnering Strategy and received money last year to set up this Housing First piece, but we have since not been able to get it for the second year. But we're still managing to just keep going. We had the coldest night of the year where we raised some money, and we're using those funds to keep things going. Island Crisis Care Society started back in the 80s in Nanaimo with the homeless shelter at that time, and we've consistently run the homeless shelter down there, Samaritan House, ever since the early 80s. So when the building became available with Parksville and Community Living, we were really excited because we think this is a great opportunity for us to have a place where people can come and we can help them to get back on their feet and then be able to move them forward. I brought some information with me, just some brochures. I think you might have got this the last time we were here. But I also brought an older newsletter that we have, because I want to draw your attention to a pilot project that we did in Nanaimo, and it's just on this second page here, and it's talking about flexibility. And it's really important that we have some different options for people, because people are not, cookie-cutter type people. There are different things that happen in people's lives, and not everyone's ready to move into an apartment right away. So what we're proposing for the building is that we would like to have some sort of a drop-in center where people can come initially. We've got interest from people, doctors and nurses, the mental health, that they would like to be involved in this as well, so that they can meet the same clients there. And then we would like to have some shelter beds. Ideally, we're thinking 10 shelter beds, which would be like 30 days or less. And then we would like some rooms that would be kind of a place where they can be more transitional, where they can have their own room and stay there, pay some rent from if they're on ministry assistance or if they have a little bit of an income. And until there's something available in the community, because as Sarah mentioned, there just isn't apartments. That's been our biggest struggle, is to find apartments in this community for people. So that's what we're hoping to do. Maybe I'll get Sarah, if you want to pass those out to people. And you wanted to say something? No, I think they got those the last time, so if anyone wanted them, they could. But so what we need is the rezoning, as Barb mentioned. They've bought the building, but they're willing to partner with us.
So what we were here today is to ask Mayor and Council if they would consider helping us or waiving the application fee for rezoning. So that's what our main goal is, so that we can move on and have the building rezoned to do the work that we want to do. Right now it's zoned public assembly, which is fine for the work that I want to do in the building, but it does not cover the homelessness work that needs to be done in this community. So that's what we're here to request from Mayor and Council.
Thanks very much, and thank you again for all of the work that you do. Questions from members of Council. Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Your Worship. First of all, I'd like to congratulate you on all the hard work that you've done. I know I sat on the Homelessness Task Force for a while, but what you guys have done in the last 2 years is incredible, and I want to acknowledge that. And so you're talking about 20 overnight beds. How many beds did you say?
No, 10 shelter beds is what we would hope. I think it's been around 8 that they've had at the extreme weather. Okay. So we're thinking 10 would be enough, but then there's some rooms, the way the building is situated, there's some single rooms at the back that were offices that would be, I think there's 5 of them? And the building's not fully configured yet. Yeah. Okay. So we're thinking 5 or 6 would be the single occupancy rooms.
Temporary housing, right?
Yeah.
And so will we still have the extreme weather shelter? Would that still be in existence, or would it be needed?
Need once we're up and running. Yeah.
Okay. The other thing I want to ask is, what zoning? Have you looked into the zoning?
Yeah, there isn't a zone
that fits it for having beds, is what the issue is.
Have you talked to staff at all?
Yeah.
Planning?
Yeah.
And their response was?
That they suggested that we go through the process and put in our zoning application and go from there. See about what kind of, and they said not to worry about the details. If we get the zoning application in, they can help us to get the right zoning that we needed.
Okay. And did they mention a cost?
Well, the application fee's $2,500, is that right?
$2,500? Okay.
Yeah. So that's what we were looking, is to help with the application fee so we could get going with the rezoning.
Can I make a motion?
We're all non-profit agencies, right?
no funding.
With no funding.
Can I make a motion to, I'm trying to decide whether to refer it to staff to look at the cost, and can we forgive the cost for the rezoning?
Yes, Your Worship, through to Councillor Powell. Basically, when costs are set on a bylaw, Council can't waive them, but what they can do is issue a grant and aid to cover their costs. So that's what you would be doing.
So what do we, the grant and aid, would that be from the Council contingency fund, or would that be the grant and, I need to know where the money's coming from?
It would come from Council contingency.
How much have we spent so far?
I don't have that exact number in front of me, but we can certainly look into it. Mr. Butterworth might know if there's room left. No.
seconder for the motion? Seconded by Councillor Salter. Any further discussion on the motion? The motion is that we waive the fee, take the money out of the... take the money out of the council's contingency fund. Okay? Any further discussion on the motion? All those in favor? Oh, sorry, Councillor Hill.
Is there any, are we getting into any kind of sort of legal gray water here by paying for the fee and then being the approving body? Is that an issue?
Mrs. Comas.
Yes, Your Worship. The fee is payable to the city regardless of the outcome of the rezoning process. So by any applicant for rezoning pays their rezoning fee and then takes their chances as to whether or not council will approve that rezoning application. So while council may choose to waive the fee in order to allow the applicants to submit their application, council is under no obligation to approve the rezoning if it is inappropriate for the community.
Follow-up, Councillor Oates.
So is it too early? The type of zoning that they wish to have, is it something that can happen? I mean, I'd hate for us to go through this process and then come back, have a report come back and say that area is not appropriate for that. We can't rezone it to the type of area that they wish. Is there a goal? Is there a destination that we can reach?
Yes, Your Worship. We could, through to Councillor Oates, you could reach that destination by referring the matter to staff for a report to address the potential zoning for the site. I'm not sure if Mr. Russell would have to create a new zone to accommodate the application, or whether or not there would be sections within the existing zoning that may accommodate the application. But in either event, it would come forward as either a spot zoning or a text amendment to accommodate this particular development.
Okay. Okay, we've got more questions. Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Directed towards Ms. Comas, I think, through you. The rezoning process, could you just outline it a little bit so I'm fairly certain I understand it, but just so our delegation and everything is aware and the timeline affected?
Yes, Your Worship. The applicant would submit their rezoning application, and assuming it is a complete application with specific plans, then staff in the planning department would check over the application and would put together a report to council, advising council as to what would be required in order to rezone the property and what kind of prerequisites would have to be put in place to meet the requirements of the zoning bylaw. Once council has approved or received that staff report, then staff would prepare a rezoning amendment bylaw to come forward to council, and that would come forward for two readings, or 2 or 3 readings, and then there would have to be a public hearing. And also we recommend, although it's not a requirement, we would recommend that the zoning applicants would hold an open house or some kind of event to provide an opportunity for the area residents to come forward and see what their plans are and have an opportunity to learn about the development. Then the public hearing would be held, and council would have the opportunity to receive input from the community on what the community thinks of the application. And then following the termination of the public hearing, the bylaw would come back again to council for final adoption.
Yes, Councillor Patterson.
Thank you. So towards the delegation, you have a timeline, I'm assuming, in place, and have you started the application process at this point? Okay.
We had met with city staff, and they had suggested that we come and do this presentation first.
Okay.
So we were outlined sort of that process already by the city staff, so we were aware that we need to do public hearings and open houses and all that.
So you know that it's going to take a wee bit of time?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Greer, I believe.
Thank you, Your Worship. I was just wondering whether we're jumping the gun a little bit. Maybe we should get that rezoning done first, have the public hearings, and then come back to council? Because I think I would gather that we're pretty well on board to support this project, but maybe we're a little premature in passing that now.
The challenge here is that they need the money so that they can go forward to get the staff working on it. That's what they want the money for. So
Okay, that's fine.
It's something. Councillor Oates.
A question and then a comment, if I might. Has the city of Parksville ever in the past provided a grant and aid for the purpose of a zoning amendment application?
It is my understanding, yes, it has occurred
Yes.
in the past. I don't have a specific...
We've also, I might point out that Hustwick Place, we also waived DCCs to the tune of about $300,000. We've been the past councils have been extremely supportive of low-cost housing and affordability, and of course also the instigation of the homelessness task force.
Okay, and a comment. I would support. I support such initiatives such as this as well. My concern is this the proper location for that? And this is something that would come out in the public hearings and that, and people. I mean, if we provide a grant in aid, and then we go through the public hearings, people may have the optics that we have already supported the zoning amendment. And I'm not sure if that would hold us in good stead. So it's a tough situation to be in, I believe, because as much as we'd like to have such a facility in our town, are we prejudicing ourselves in our ability to, the optics of being not conflicted in our decision-making process, since we're the people that are funding it?
My
We
understand-
funded the application, so. If I'm a resident in the area and for some reason I don't want this facility in my neighborhood, I may take issue with my council providing the funding for the zoning application.
My understanding of the request tonight is simply to get to the approval process for the rezoning. It's got nothing to do with the actual rezoning. That's a whole other process, as Mrs. Comas has explained. So this is just an attempt to enable this group to do that. So I don't make that connection. And the other thing I'd like to point out for everybody is that at the present time, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the Salvation Army, which is about a block and a half away, is used for the cold weather shelter, or has been used in the cold weather shelter in the past, and they serve meals there, and there's been no objection expressed.
Is already in that parking lot that provides a lot of that kind of service already.
Sarah, did you want to make another comment?
I was just going to speak. I was just going to speak to why the task force felt that it was important that this was a good building of choice as well. In part, it was because of the location, because that's an area that the clients that we're looking to serve already come to. They used to go there because it was the public health center and the mental health unit. They go to the SOS to receive emergency services and other support services. My office for the homeless prevention program is there, so people are already coming into the area. And then, like you mentioned, just a couple blocks away is the soup kitchen, which operates 4 days a week. And they have typically in the past held the emergency weather shelter where we've had no incidents. So we feel that in terms, if we could choose a point in the city, that would be an ideal location because it's already supporting what's going on.
Councillor Salter.
Thank you, Worship. So actually, I was going to mention what Sarah just said, which was that, it is actually it's located in an area where all those services are being delivered at any rate. So, and as well that the health unit used to be where the mental health unit was. So it wouldn't be new. It wouldn't be new or different clientele in the area. They've already been utilizing that building. And the other, again, was that we are, at this time, only addressing the grant and aid, and then the other piece we would address at a later date. So we're not making decisions on future possibilities. I do want to say thank you for coming tonight, and it's very interesting and very good information that you provided, Council. Thank you.
Any further comments on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. That's carried. Before you leave, first of all, I want to thank you. I thank you again for all of the great work that you do, and it's so important in our community, not only for Parksville but for the outlying areas, because we know that there are several issues there. Has the mental health services improved quite a bit since we last? I know that Councillor Powell advocated for more mental health services. We've met with the Minister of Health.
I think
Has that improved?
The task force can speak from providing support services to individuals, so providing them rides where they need to get rides to if they're living out of town, helping them access services that they need to access. That kind of support service has been critical, those outreach services. And then we've also worked, I've sat alongside with the Oceanside Health Center to increase their mental health walk-in services. So they have walk-in services again, Monday to Friday, and they're just in the process of extending those hours through a relationship with another ministry. They've been able to secure an additional person to extend those hours. So that is starting to improve the ability for people to walk in when they're in crisis, because it's never from 9 to 4.
Monday to Friday.
Well, thanks again very much, and thank you for all the good work that you do and the impact that you have on the overall community. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Council, what I'd like to do, with your permission, the next two items that we have are two pieces of correspondence from the Liberal candidate Carrie Powell-Davidson and the New Democratic Party candidate Gord Johns, and these are simply letters that they've responded to our request in terms of the issues of infrastructure, affordable housing, and transportation. So given that it's just to be received, I wonder if I could have them both at the same time. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Salter. Any further questions, comments? All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. That is carried. Okay. Now, the next report we have, Mr. Figuera, would you please give us the background on the issue regarding Ermineskin Avenue water main and pavement replacement project construction tender award?
If I may, Your Worship, before Council is a report recommending award of the construction tender for the replacement of the water main and pavement on Ermineskin Avenue. 5 competitive bids were received for construction of the project. The bids were analyzed by staff and the engineer of record, and they were found to be in order with just a few minor mathematical errors, which didn't really affect the order of the bids. The lowest bid was provided by Napit Industries, and it was within 4% of the engineer of record's estimate. Sufficient funds are available in the water fund. However, in the general revenue fund, which covers the road works, we'll need another $16,700, and we're asking approval to move that from the general revenue accumulated surplus to fund the construction. And that will encompass some of the 10% contingency that we've placed on the project. The recommendations are as per the report.
Thank you very much. Do I have a mover and a seconder? Moved by Councillor Greer, seconded by Councillor Powell. Are there any questions for Mr. Figuera on this particular issue? Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just reading through the report, that if it's awarded, this is should be about 3 weeks or so. Is that from today's date? And construction completed by end of October. Is that correct?
If I may, Your Worship, through to Councillor Patterson. Yes, within 3 weeks, it's expected they can begin construction within 3 weeks of the date that we get council approval.
So just to follow up, so this is a relatively short project, about a 6-week project?
Yes, that is correct.
Thank you.
Any further questions before I call the vote? All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. That is carried. Okay. I just want to advise council before Mr. Butterworth gives us the background on this issue is that the amount that you have in your documentation is incorrect. It is not $6.5 million. It is $5.6 million as per before. So, Mr. Butterworth, would you please give us the background on the issue regarding the ERWS loan authorization bylaw?
Yes, Your Worship. On August the 10th, Council approved a revised plan and budget for the ERWS water intake and treatment plant, as well as distribution systems. We reviewed the costs and have come up with a number of funding alternatives. Senior governments have committed $6 million at this point of grants towards the project. City reserves and development cost charges reserves will be used to fund it. It still leaves us with a funding shortfall. In our plan, we have $5.6 million of borrowing that is required. This borrowing is due to there not being enough development cost charges collected to date to cover the system. So the borrowing is on behalf of the development community, which will be repaid through future development cost charge collections. Originally, when I did the report, I added in a contingency amount into the amount that we need to borrow of another $900,000, essentially a 10% increase for contingency, as we normally do with our contracts, but new information has been brought to my attention where the contingency is already built into the project, so we should be able to move ahead with borrowing of $5.6 million. So the recommendation is that the report from the Director of Finance dated August 12, 2015, entitled ERWS Loan Authorization Bylaw be received, and number 2, that staff proceed to obtain borrowing approval in the amount of $5,600,000 for the purpose of building a new river intake water treatment plant and transmission lines.
Thank you, Mr. Butterworth. Do I have a mover and a seconder? Moved by Councillor Powell, seconded by Councillor Beale. Are there any questions, comments? Councillor Salter.
Thank you, Worship. So, and I think through you, to Lucky, I think, I don't know, whoever. The question is, we're going for a 16 megaliter plant. And so my only question is, because we need the DCCs to pay the additional amount, will that 16 mil support the build out to get the DCCs that we need? Because when we spoke our last meeting, he did mention that, well, the DCCs, it has to be new build-out that supports the DCC money that we get. So that's my question. Will it support that?
Mr. Butterworth, I think that someone asked that similar question that night from the audience. I know we have to sit down with the ODCA and look at the DCC costs and the impact, but I don't think from your comments at that time, I didn't think they were that much of an impact or that large.
So I think Mike wasn't here when we asked that question.
Yeah, the question on whether it will support a build-out is probably better to be answered by Mr. Squire than myself, because I'm not sure what our current usage are exactly and what population base the 16 megaliter option will support. So Mr. Squire might be able to answer that.
Mr. Squire wasn't here.
Mr. Squire, do you want to?
Yes, through your worship. There is certain components of the project that are supporting full build-out, which would be the full DCCs. Those components are the intake. The transmission mains are designed to supply the full build-out, and also the raw water transmission main. The water treatment plant, as you're aware, it's a phased-in project. So The first initial phase will support up to 16 megaliters. Initial indications are right now that'll support us for the next 10 years, and then 10 years from now, based on our current growth and our current water demand, we'll have to upgrade to 24 megaliters. And after 20 years after that, so 30, 40 years in the future, that will be the full build-out. So it's a phased approach for the water treatment for the DCCs, but the other components, the intakes, will be built to the full build-out.
When we were advised by the senior levels of government that the Build Canada Fund was oversubscribed, we initially went, if you'll recall, I think we were looking at $36 or $37 million, and that wasn't going to happen because the Build Canada Fund was oversubscribed, and we were told to go to Plan B, so we had to go to Plan B, and everybody knew that that plan would only last 10 years. So we're dealing with a situation that the hand that we've been dealt, and so that's pretty much in 10 years' time. There's no doubt that we'll probably have to, we'll go back to the drawing board and have to expand the water treatment facility.
So just so that I'm clear, so what we're talking about is the borrowing and it to be repaid through DCCs, and that and in order to receive the dollars through DCCs, there has to be build out. So my question isn't, I understand the 10-year, I understand the phases and that. What I'm wondering is, will we be able to provide enough water for the build out to recapture those DCCs to pay it? Does that
Mr.
make
Squire?
sense?
Through your worship, yes, essentially the intake is sized for the full build-out. So that portion of it will be able to extract the water for the full build-out.
Okay. Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Worship. Since we're dealing with the loan authorization, what's the term of the loan? Is this a 25-year loan?
Mr. Butterworth.
Yes, we've set it up with a 25-year loan.
Any further questions? All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. That is carried. Okay, the next item is the water and intake and treatment plant assent voting question. As we all know, we have to go to referendum under the current legislation. This is it's an interesting situation because, as I've said before, if for some reason the referendum didn't go well, Island Health are going to force us to do it anyway, and that story's not over. I'll be looking to talk to some of our provincial cabinet ministers about this, because there's some things here that don't make any sense. But nevertheless, this next question is regarding the water intake and treatment plant assent voting question, which will be held on November 21st. So it's pretty straightforward. Mrs. Comas, can you add anything to what's already in the report?
No, Your Worship, other than to say that recommendation number 3, based on the adoption of Mr. Butterworth's report, will now read that the assent voting questions state as follows. Do you agree to the adoption of City of Parksville Loan Authorization Bylaw 2015 number 1519, which will authorize the City of Parksville to borrow $5.6 million to construct a water intake and treatment facility in accordance with Island Health requirements?
Do I have a mover and a seconder for the record? Moved by Councillor Greer, seconded by Councillor Beale. Any questions or comments? Councillor Patterson and then Councillor Salter.
Thank you. Directed to Ms. Comas. November 21st, is that the earliest that we can go to referendum?
Basically, it is for a variety of factors. The first being that once Council adopts the financial plan bylaw this evening, all of the documentation now has to go forward to the Inspector of Municipalities, and we need approval for our loan authorization bylaw from the Inspector. September is one of their busiest months, and so we're looking at 4 to 6 weeks, perhaps slightly longer, in order to receive that approval. Following that, we have 80 days in which to hold the referendum. We have already booked the facilities because in order to get both the Baptist Church and PCTC on the same day, November 21st was the earliest date we could do that and meet the other requirements.
Follow-up. Will there be any advance voting, or will there only be the one and only day?
There will be one advance voting opportunity provided in accordance with the Local Government Act, and that will be on the Wednesday prior to the 21st, so the 18th, I believe that is, November 18th.
Councillor Salter.
So my question is, this speaks to the 16 megaliter per day, right? So I'm wondering if I could suggest a friendly amendment to include that that's what it is that we're talking about in this question, that do we agree, et cetera, will authorize the City of Borough to construct a 16 megaliter per day water intake and treatment facility?
Yes, we can do that. I would think we could do that if council wishes to do that. The reality is that what the assent voting is about is about the bylaw and about the money. It's not about the size of the treatment facility or the filtration capabilities or the intake. It's not. Those have already been dealt with prior to the loan authorization bylaw being brought forward to council. Whether or not this question has to be submitted to the inspector as well. Whether or not the inspector would agree with that, I don't know, because basically the language of the Act is such that the question has to be phrased in such a way that a simple yes or no based on the purpose of the bylaw, which is to borrow. The bylaw has nothing to do with the size of the facility. It has strictly to do with the amount of money that is being borrowed, and that's all of the information, the communication strategy, everything that we do in support of this process will reference a 16 megaliter facility. So it's up to council whether they would like to do that.
Follow-up, Councillor Salter.
And my follow-up is this. The communities have asked that I request this, that I make this amendment. So I do this on behalf of people who live in the city of Parksville residents. And I think it's just about instilling confidence. And I think if that's all it takes, then I don't think it would be, I don't think it's an out of reach possibility to put.
So you want to make that motion? I think
I amended.
I think it requires a motion. I don't see it
would need
as
to be a motion, Your Worship.
So would you want to read that very, very slowly, and then we'll see if we've got a seconder?
Okay. So I was asking for an amendment so we already have the question, which is to borrow $5.6 million to construct a 16 megaliter per day water intake. So just adding that there.
I'm sorry. You'll have to speak louder. Do you want to say something? Microphone, please.
Sorry, maybe I misheard. I was hearing 16 megaliters before the word water intake, but maybe that wasn't where you had it. I'm sorry, I may have misheard. Pardon me? Because the water intake is not 16 megaliters, it's the treatment plant is for 16 megaliters.
Plant for water intake?
It could be 16 megaliters before the word treatment facility, I think might be accurate, Mr. Squire.
That's right, it would.
Okay, so you've heard the motion. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Okay, seeing none, the motion fails. Okay, any further questions or comments on this particular recommendation? Seeing none, I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. That is carried. Okay. So this evening we have two bylaws for final adoption. And before I ask for a mover and a seconder, I'm going to read the recommendation that the 5-year financial plan amendment bylaw 2015-2019, number 1517.1, and outdoor burning amendment bylaw 2015-1428.3 be reconsidered and finally adopted, signed by the mayor and the corporate officer, and the corporate seal affixed thereto. Moved by Councillor Powell, seconded by Councillor Oates. All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. That is carried. We have one bylaw for 3 readings, and that's the loan authorization ERWS bylaw 2015, number 1519. Do I have a mover and a seconder? Moved by Councillor Greer, seconded by Councillor Salter.
Your Worship, I believe there was an amendment in there that this is a 2-part motion, that Section 3 City of Parksville Loan Authorization ERWS bylaw.
I have $5,600,000 in my notes. I guess everybody else doesn't. Thank you for pointing that out. I have the corrected. So the corrected amount is a sum not exceeding $5,600,000. Okay? So I have a mover and a seconder. All those in favor? Thank you. That is carried. Okay, we're moving on now, Council, to new business. I have a number of information items under new business, so I'll leave that to the last, and I'll go around the table. Who has any items under new business? Councillor Greer.
Thank you, Your Worship. The editorial 2 weeks ago about in-camera meetings was interesting and accurate to a point. However, I took exception to Mr. Harding's paragraph which stated the Council accepts staff suggestions to cut the public out. Over the past 6 years, I've had several conversations with our staff and Council members about too many in-camera meetings. I have also said that when a decision is made in camera, it should be made public at some time. Everything the city does is paid for by the taxpayers, including everyone's salary. If this Council wants transparency, then we have a responsibility to the public to have full disclosure. I would like to make a motion that Council be more involved in decision-making for in-camera meetings. Unless an emergency meeting has to be held, I would like to see all members of Council be present at those meetings, and that all decisions made at those meetings be made public at some point in time.
Would you read that slowly again? Because are you saying that when a decision is made for a Council agenda to go in camera, you want everybody involved in that decision?
I'll read it again.
Slowly.
That Council be more involved in the decision-making for an in-camera meeting, which means we should have some information before it is put into the minutes. So that's one thing. Unless an emergency meeting has to be held, I would like to see all members of the Council present. And I think that's important. And then finally, and that all decisions made at those meetings be made public at some point in time, not necessarily the next week, but at some time, the public should know what the majority of those meetings. And there is an exception of 1 or 2, but ordinarily, it should be made public.
I'm going to ask Mrs. Comas to follow up on my comments. When I get the agenda for approval, when there's an in-camera meeting, there is always, that decision is always based on the legislative requirements as contained in the Local Government Act. So there's no question of somebody decides, well, we're going to have an in-camera meeting because it's fun to have an in-camera meeting. It's based on fairly critical criteria in the legislation. The other thing is that there are excuse me, can I finish speaking?
Well, actually, it needs to be seconded so that we can speak to it. There was a motion.
I made the motion.
You're making that motion now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Have I got a seconder for the motion? Who's seconding the motion? Councillor Salter. Okay. So the other thing is that there are some items that we rise and report, but there's some that we don't. And again, that's covered in legislation. So, Mrs. Comas, I don't know if you, before I go around the table, I don't know if you want to add anything to what I've just said, but it's pretty straightforward. Do you have anything to add?
Your Worship, if the other councillors would like to address the motion, I would be happy to wait.
Okay. Councillor Oates.
So I'm not clear what the effect of a positive vote on this motion would be. which with respect to how would it change council's practice? If you're saying that council should be more involved in the decision making, I think perhaps a mirror is what you need, because the motion is made to go in camera. At that point, council has the ability to be involved in the decision. It's a motion that's made to go in camera. If there's concerns about going in camera and the council being involved in the decision, that's when the decision is made. The suggestion is that we go in camera for such and such, but we make a motion here at this table, and then we all put our hands up to either go in camera or not go in camera. So I'm not sure what the effect of a positive vote would be on this with respect to the process that we currently have in place. So if you could help me understand how things would be different with a positive vote, maybe it might change my mind.
Thank you, Your Worship. The idea is that when we get the information, I pick my agenda up on a Friday, and it's already on the agenda. I would like to see some information. It doesn't have to be a lot of information, but some idea before it actually is printed in the agenda at exactly what we're going to talk about, so that at that time we might have a chance to change something, add something, take something away, or maybe not have the discussion in camera at all. There have been occasions when I feel that some of the discussions we've had really didn't need to go in camera, that they could have been discussed in open council.
Councillor Oates.
So just so I'm clear, so before the agenda is printed, you want to have this discussion?
Yes, I'd like to know what is happening before it's already on the agenda.
Speaking as the mayor, I have never allowed something to go on the agenda that I didn't think was following the legislative process. And I talked to staff about that, and staff are always in a position to explain to me why that must go in camera. So as Councillor Oates has pointed out, if you disagree with that decision, the fallback position you have is the night of the meeting when I call to go in camera. At that point in time, you could say I object, or I'm voting against it, and it'll be a majority vote.
Okay. So if I'm clear, then what you want us to do is to make a decision outside of the public view about what the agenda is going to be.
No, I'm not deciding. I'm not issuing that statement at all. All I'd like is some input before we come to the council meeting. It's already on the agenda, so, and you're right, we can turn it down. I could vote against it, but it's still on the agenda, and in more cases than enough, we'd still go in camera. I'm just saying I'd like a little heads up on what is happening before we make those decisions. And I respect the fact that the mayor does look at it, and he accepts what we do go in camera for.
Mrs. Comas, any comments?
Yes, Your Worship. You are correct in that we never put anything on an in-camera agenda that does not have the legislative prerogative to be there. And Councillor Oates is also correct that Council has the opportunity, when we move into a closed meeting, to vote on whether or not that closed meeting takes place. Further to that, there is a section of the legislation that states that if Council wishes to debate an item as to whether or not it should be dealt with in a closed meeting, that is a legitimate debate to be had in a closed meeting. So what would happen in that event is that Council would go into a closed meeting, debate whether or not the subject matter should be dealt with in an open meeting, and if the determination is that Council should deal with it in an open meeting, then Council would terminate the closed meeting, come back into an open meeting, and either refer the item to a public agenda at the next meeting or deal with it at that time in an open meeting. The difficulty with that is that whatever gallery we have had or audience we have had would have departed because we were going into a closed meeting, which the option to refer it to the next open meeting for discussion is certainly there at Council's purview. The other issue with respect to the agenda preparation. The city has a procedure bylaw which we are required by legislation to adopt, and the procedure bylaw sets out how the agendas are prepared and how items are approved for the agenda. And the approval is for the corporate officer, which is myself, in conjunction with the mayor, to approve agenda items. Then the agenda is prepared and it is provided to council no later than 12 noon on Friday of the meeting before, to provide council with an opportunity to review their agenda materials before they come into a council meeting. At that time, if council has a concern with an item on a closed agenda, then you would have the opportunity to prepare to vote accordingly when the matter comes before council in the open meeting. So that is in order to change that process to provide council as an approval body for agenda would require an amendment to the procedure bylaw.
Councillor Beal, did you have any comments tonight? No?
Yeah, I have a question though, just to clarify, because I thought there was a piece around that we were all present or something to that effect. Can you?
Part of my motion was, unless an emergency meeting has to be held, I would like to see all members of council be present at those meetings, and that all decisions made at those meetings be made public at some point in time.
So would that be two motions?
Your Worship, I believe it was provided in as an all-encompassing one motion. With respect to council attendance, that's strictly the purview of council. If we perhaps have advance notice that council members are going to be away and council would refer a matter to another agenda when all council members can be present, then that's strictly council's prerogative. With respect to rising and reporting, legislation was changed when the community charter was brought into effect. Prior to the community charter coming into effect, councils were required to rise and report on items of a financial nature that were adopted within a closed meeting. The community charter eliminated that requirement, and because we post notice of closed meetings, a closed meeting is a duly constituted meeting of council, and there is not a requirement on council legislatively to rise and report. However, there are times when the matters dealt with in a closed meeting in the public interest should be disclosed, because further activity or the expenditure of funds would obviously show the public that a decision had been made somewhere along the line. And in those cases, we do rise and report. One of the items that has been dealt with recently in a closed meeting is the authorization to hire an occupational health and safety officer. With respect to that position, when the financial plan amendments came forward, there was a section in the report which dealt with that decision, even though it had been made in a closed meeting, and that was because it was now that the debate had taken place and the discussion that had to be held was held, the decision could then come forward in an open meeting, and it came forward in an open meeting. So there is the ability for council to certainly do that with decisions that could be in the open realm.
Okay, Councillor Greer.
Yeah, just one last comment. I would suggest we call the question, because we go around this point forever, but I would suggest we call the question.
Okay, all those in favor of the motion? Opposed? Okay, that motion is defeated. And just a final comment from me, this is something that I take extremely seriously as mayor. I don't go into camera lightly, and I rely on the competency of our staff to guide me on that. And if I need to look at what the legislation says, I look at it from time to time. So, and we have that fallback position when it comes the night of the meeting. You've read your agenda. You've had 3 days to read the agenda, and you've read the agenda, and you say, there's always that option to say, well, I vote against going in camera. Okay. Anything else under new business? Councillor Oates.
Yes, just a couple of items, Your Worship. I just want to recognize the Beach Fest and what a fantastic event that they had down there. I was down there today to volunteers, how they maintain that level of energy for. I mean, it's a full year project for them. They were down there today cleaning up and everything. I just, what a fantastic job they do in bringing the spotlight on our city. And speaking of spotlight on our city, I think maybe everybody knows, but I think maybe we should send a letter of congratulations to our MLA on her winning gold at the Pan American Games in Toronto just a couple of days ago.
Thank you very much. You just got carried out two of my new business amounts. That's great. Just a little bit of a filler. The record is 104,427 visitors this year. That's fantastic. 104,427. And yeah, that beat the last of that's an all-time record, breaking the 2010 record of 5,426. So the other thing that I wanted to point out with, as Councillor Oates so aptly brought forward, this is MLA Stillwell's first major win on home soil, racing to the finish line in an incredible 19.58 seconds. I don't think some of us could run that fast. I'm sure we couldn't. I wanted to bring to council's attention. I have a sort of a sad story and a happy story. Earlier this month, Mr. Don Levers passed away. And Mr. Levers is known as one of the forefathers of Parksville. He's come to see me on a number of occasions, and I've always appreciated his kindness and his retelling of the history of Parksville. And the last time I met with him, which wasn't all that long ago, I met with him, and staff were there. We had Amanda and Sarah and Debbie Tardif, and he brought in a whole series of pictures that had been taken since the 1920s and 30s and 40s of Parksville. And he loaned those to us, and we're in the process of making copies, and the intention is to put them up around the building with places and times and dates and all that sort of thing. And we were going to have him come and be with us on that day when we do that. So in the future, what we'll do is we'll invite his family and to come, and we'll put those pictures up. Fantastic pictures, and it's amazing to see how the rod and gun has stayed in the same place and developed over the last 50, 60, 70, 80 years. But Mr. Levers was always a very, very kind man, and I wanted to express to his family and his friends in Parksville and the outlying areas our sympathies on his passing. It was a bit of a shock to me. And then the other item, which is good news, I'm being invited tomorrow as the mayor to attend an announcement that's going to be made by the Morningstar Golf Course. The National 2016 University College Golf Championships, one of the largest golf events in amateur golf in Canada, with a committed 156 players from across Canada, coaches and Golf Canada representatives, and the family of contestants. It's expected that at least 300 persons will be making the trek to perfect Parksville and the Morningstar Golf Course. So this is going to be late next May, and it's expected that the event will require a minimum of 1,000 hotel nights over the week. So that's pretty fantastic, and looking forward to it. And there'll probably be more to say sometime in the future, because we'll want the manager of Morningstar to come and talk to us more about that probably early in the new year. Before that takes place, that'll be a fantastic tournament. So
are you and I playing in it?
I don't think so. It says university, unless we want to go back to university.
Does my PhD count?
No. Yes, Councillor Powell.
I would just like to clarify, yes, we did come out. I'm following up on Ms. Coma's comments about how we reported back to or brought it, what's the term? Brought it to council. And I think we need to mention the context about why it was an in-camera meeting. It was HR issues. We didn't go in camera to talk about this position, and so I want that to be really clear, because I don't want Mr. Harding to go in the paper and say, we hired somebody, we had an in-camera meeting to do that.
Mr. Harding will do his job regardless of what you have to say. Okay, on that note, I'm going to call for an adjournment. Do I have a mover? Councillor Greer, seconded by Councillor Rhodes. We are adjourned. Thank you very much.